Let's talk about you. Who are you? Where were you born? How old are you now?
I hate to admit my age, but I'm 79. And I was born on Munjoy Hill on Kellogg Street. I was the fifth of 8 children, but I was actually born in the house. Didn't bother to go, I wasn't important enough to go to a hospital. But where am I now?
What were the circumstances
Well,
under which you were born in the house?
Okay, in 1934, that was the midst of the Great Depression. My parents were from Ireland. My father worked as a longshoreman. Probably 85% of the longshoremen were from Ireland with no education. My parents had no education. They also spoke Gaelic, but more English than Gaelic. They spoke Gaelic when they didn't want us to know what they were saying. And they were able and smart. In fact, they're amazing to me that with very little income, they could raise 8 children. And none of them ever went to jail, which is helpful. But it was a very working class neighborhood. Everybody was either Irish, Italian, or Jewish. And it was an exciting neighborhood. There were big families. There were all sorts of kids. You didn't have to be outside 3 minutes and you had a game of baseball on the side of the hill, or touch football, or something of that sort. There was a little store right across from my house. That was really the de facto community center, run by a terrific Italian family, the Cavallaros. Very nice people. Most of them are gone now. But that's the neighborhood, very working class. I don't recall knowing anybody that went to college. I think that was for somebody else on the other side of town.
Your father, can you talk about him a little bit? I mean, I know
Yeah.
he was a longshoreman.
He was a longshoreman. He served in France in World War I. And we didn't have any great things in our house that could be sold, but now that I think of it, he had his helmet and his gas mask. And I think he got his citizenship, at least it's the family legend, when they discharged him from the Army in World War I. In fact, I filled that out at any federal job I've had. But no, he was, that's where he grew up on the waterfront. In fact, I believe he lived in the same house that Longfellow was born in. Now it's where the Marriott Residence Inn is. But I have to get it checked carefully. Was it that house or the next house? I've been bragging about him living in the same house. See, Longfellow, when he was an infant, I think, moved up to Monument Square. And that, gave me a chance to associate with some literary greatness, even though I wasn't there. And incidentally, I did have a chance to go to Congress for a couple terms, and I served in the same congressional district as Longfellow's father did. Longfellow's father served one term in Congress from 1820 to 1822.
So the neighborhood, I understood that you just sort of hung out in the neighborhood yourself, and you played pool, you gambled, you were an interesting kid. You had an interesting life back in the day.
Well, I gambled a little bit, but my total wealth probably at any time at its peak probably was $2. But we'd be playing dice or cards on the stairs. And my father, his cousin, was chief of police. And when there was no work on the waterfront, he'd be walking home. The chief would pick him up in his car. It was a little awkward driving by my little card game. At that time, they took those things more seriously than they do now. But in regard to pool rooms, I had a fairly successful athletic career in grammar school. And I had a brother who was very successful. He was captain of the basketball team at Chever's, pitcher on the baseball team, and the quarterback on the football team. He got a lot of attention. And a lot of people expected me to be able to do that, but I was actually a little skinny kid, probably 125 pounds, and the coaches didn't recognize any of my talent. I hate to admit it, but they were probably right. So kids have to get attention one way or the other. So I kind of gravitated toward pool rooms. I kind of like to play pool. And in that sense, nobody in my neighborhood that I knew of had a checking account. My mother would give me the money to go down to pay the light bill and a telephone bill, because I stopped on the way at the pool room. And a lot of times it put me under a little pressure, because the light bill money and the telephone money was resting with my pool skills, which were pretty good, but not as good as a lot of other people. But it was interesting, let's say.
Did you ever lose the money? Did you ever have to go back to mom and?
No, I did not. I generally might have lost early, but regained the money. Not because of great skills, but better than most of the people I met later in life when I was at the Blaine House. There was hardly anybody that I couldn't beat there. But they kind of grew up more properly.
People like who?
Well, I'm trying to think.
Weren't such good pool players.
Well, I'd say David Flanagan, who went on to Harvard and very, very smart and very able. He would not be much as a pool player. And it's not fair to criticize him because he just didn't have the training that I had.
Name some of the people in your neighborhood. Do you remember, did you have a best friend, and where'd you go to school, grammar school? And I presume you went to grammar school?
Yeah, I actually went to Cathedral Grammar School, and then I went on to Cheverus High School. And at one time, I think, my 7 siblings, I think all of us were at different schools. Some went to the public school, some went to the Catholic school, and some switched schools different times depending how they were doing. But most of my friends were in the neighborhood. And I didn't think of in terms of best friends, but I thought we were all friends. You played baseball and football in the street with them and so forth. It was a lively neighborhood. And instead of having a formal community center where kids go to participate in things, it was right out front of your house. And the important place was the little store that people gravitated toward. In fact, I can remember in the early part of World War II, all the young, a few years older than me, maybe 7 or 8, they'd be back in their Navy uniform, their Marine uniform, their Army uniform. They're back from their basic training or whatever. No, but it was a terrific neighborhood, excellent. I think kids, they understood loyalty and trust and those things, but they weren't fancily schooled.
You lived in an apartment in what I call a triple-decker up on Kellogg Street. Where were you in the building, first floor?
Yeah, I think my family lived on the 3rd floor initially, but I think my mother was concerned with the kids hanging out the window. It'd be a long drop from the 3rd floor. So I think a practical decision was made when the 1st floor opened up. So it was a very small place. It was quite a contrast with going to the Blaine House. There was 1 bathroom, 5 little rooms. Blaine House, I think there were 18 rooms, 6 or 7 bathrooms. Actually, all kinds of people help you out.
Talk about your mother a little bit. What do you remember about her?
The more I think of it, she was amazing to take care of 8 kids. She didn't work outside the house, but I don't think we had a washer and dryer and all those fancy things. And I think we got a telephone when I was probably in the 6th or 7th grade. But, her objective was make sure the kids didn't get in trouble, and that was achieved, and that people would find work, whether it was caddying, a paper route, or anything. But she did an excellent job, excellent, now that I think about it, with no schoolhousing to speak of, and no financial resources of any caliber to speak about, just amazing.
Anything in particular you remember about your childhood, holidays, Christmas?
Well, we used to vacation in Hawaii. No, I didn't know what vacations were. And if I went to the dentist or something like that, she might stop at a little restaurant called the Puritan up here in Congress Street. No, the people talk about family vacations. That was something foreign, not only to me, but I think most of the people in my neighborhood. I think the big thing is work, stay out of trouble, go to school, go to church.
And what about Christmas? Was that a big deal in your house?
I'm still puzzled how they had as many gifts as they had. None of them were big, but I do not know to this day, because on the waterfront. It wasn't a steady job. You worked when the ship was in. And they made pretty good dough when the ship was in. But I still do not understand how there always seemed to be gifts. I don't know how they did it. It's a puzzle, or a puzzlement, as they say.
So you worked from a pretty young age. You did some caddying as well?
I caddied at the Portland Country Club, which was very elite. Not so elite anymore because many of my friends started to be members. That didn't bring it down, but it's true. But I did, and until I got fired out there. There was a program they had out there. Caddies, if they were on a good behavior, could play Monday mornings, play golf. And I got into a little skirmish at the caddy pen. So I was told I couldn't play Monday. I went and played anyway. And the caddy master found out about it and came after me. He had gotten hurt in the service, so he couldn't run very fast. So I'd kind of wrestle on the greens with the friends of mine while he was trying to chase me, and then we'd move to the next green. But I did get fired permanently. Then I went to Riverside, and they didn't have so much dough over there. It's hard to get to Riverside from Munjo Hill and the Portland Country Club. But those were good experiences. And I was really delighted some years later, some friends of mine invited me to play at the country club. Only a couple times, they didn't want to hurt their reputations.
How long were you a caddy? I mean, was this like a week?
I didn't, most of my jobs didn't last very long, by choice of the management. I was probably out there a year or two, but it was quite exciting. That's a beautiful golf course.
You made some money?
Oh, yeah. In fact, one day I thought I was going to be really rich. It was the 4th of July. I had to hitchhike to get out to the Portland Country Club in Falmouth. And I got out there later, like 9:30. All the caddies are out on the course. And then 3 members of the Payson family decided they wanted to play golf. And I guess they owned a fancy house nearby in one of the wealthiest, most successful families in Maine. So I had a chance to carry 3 bags. And I was just trying to calculate the dough. And I think they quit after 5 holes, so you get paid for 9. And so I got paid for 3. I must have paid $3 or $4. And I was thinking about investments after that. No, really, that's a true story. And later on, I met that Payson when I spoke at the dedication of the museum here up at Congress Square, and I talked to him about it.
Was that Charles Shipman?
I think it was Charles Shipman. He was then married, I think, to a relatively young woman who wrote for Sports Illustrated. But he was very nice, but, it was quite a sitting with him. And my big moment earlier in life was carrying their bags, and he was very nice to me.
It's kind of startling for you. I get that feeling even now. When you reflect on where you came from and where you went.
Well, I think it showed what opportunity there is in America. I'm afraid that a lot of that isn't so much anymore. In public office, there was more of a tendency you earned it then. Now it's a little more of a tendency to purchase it. So yes, I think of friends of mine in the political world came from humble backgrounds. Ken Curtis, George Mitchell. George's father, cut the grass at Colby. His mother worked in the factory. So many, Peter Carus' father had a little hot dog place. So many came from humble backgrounds, and I think it's important for them because I think that your biography sort of informs your policy choices, what you learned when you were very young, and like how important it is to own your own home and not just be a tenant on the first floor with 2 families on the second and third floor. And background is terribly important. Not that very rich people can't do well. The Kennedys were listed as maybe one of the 15 richest families in the country way back. And Teddy couldn't have been more, for example, committed, or Bobby Kennedy or Jack Kennedy, to the interest of working class people.
Talk about, let's zip back in time to when you came in contact with the Jesuits at Chevrolet. What was that experience like? What do you think of that education that you got in your experience over there? Any anecdotes?
Well, first, I went to Cathedral Grammar School up here on Congress or Cumberland Avenue. But to go to Sheriff's, I went all of 20 yards across the yard. That's where Sheriff's was. They had about 8 rooms. And I had almost all Jesuits. Now I think there were just a couple of Jesuits at Sheriff's. And I think they were fairly demanding. I can recall going home and translating Latin and kind of doing it by the book, at least the first couple of years, until the pool room got me completely.
Until what?
The pool rooms, it was more exciting than trying to translate Latin. No, they were good. They were smart, they challenging, and I actually was a pretty good student my first year. Then it went downhill after that. It wasn't so interesting to me. I think when the coaches didn't recognize my athletic talents, I wasn't having the victory. I had to do something else. But the Jesuits did a good job. They did more for me than I'd done for that school.
At Cathedral or Chevrolet, do you recall being disciplined by them at all?
I think the Catholic schools were kind of serious about discipline. And you knew it, so you learn that from the second grade on up. So you kind of go along with the program for the most part.
So, back to my question. Do you recall ever being disciplined for anything in particular? Or are you saying you
mean,
went with the program?
Did they hit my fingers or anything else? On occasion. Not so much in Chevrolet, but in grammar school. And I don't want to be critical of nuns. My younger sister's been a nun for 50 years. She became principal of that school. She became principal of St. Mary's in Augusta. And when she left, she had about 500 people on a send-off. I couldn't get 50 people to come to a function.
So when you get rapped on the knuckles a couple of times, you figure it out pretty quick.
Yeah, but generally I kind of earned it. And that gave you a little status, too.
Do you ever remember anything in particular that you did to earn it?
No, I really can't. I can't.
To the best of your recollection,
No.
you can't recall.
No, I didn't have a tough grammar school. I did, I did well athletically. Grammar school, not after that. I did well, academically, and every day was kind of a victory for me. And that's important because, as I said, biography informs policy choices. A lot of times kids come, they don't succeed athletically, academically, and they're not friendly with the physically strongest kids in the school, and they get pushed around. And every day is a losing day for them, so they don't go to school. All of a sudden, they're charged with truancy. And if it keeps up, they'd send them to the training center. And they had nice words, training center, but kids went out there in handcuffs. And it reflected on action I took later as a legislator, saying that you couldn't send kids to the training center, which is jail in many respects, for not going to school or running away from homes they should have run away from. So it's important, your early life, your early experiences. If everything was easy and you're off to fancy private schools and everybody's taking care of you, it's a different world than growing up, slugging it out, and understanding how other kids are treated.
What aspirations did you have when you were approaching graduation at Chevrolet?
Well, I know before that, I just hoped I could get a job driving the truck instead of using the shovel and the pick in the middle of the street, as I saw a lot of people. But when I graduated from Chevrolet, my sister was a real influence. She was a nurse, anesthetist at the Mercy Hospital, and very young, she was the night supervisor up there. She did all the work to get me enrolled at the Boston College. And it wasn't high. If you went to a Jesuit high school then, you could get into a Boston college easier. So I went to Boston College, but I didn't do much there as a freshman either. Then I went in the Army for a couple of years. That was good to me. It got me the GI Bill, and I got to see a little bit of heaven in a place called Hawaii.
Back to your sister, though. why did she have, why was she in charge of what you would do?
Well,
How did that work?
she wasn't in charge so much,
But did she fill out the paperwork?
and my mother was pretty busy with 7 other kids. And she, you know, at that time, she was probably the most educated person in the house. And incidentally, she's still working. No, but she did a good job taking care of the papers and so forth to get on. And the incident, also, the tuition was $500 at Boston College. I lived off campus. I think now it's probably $50,000. But I'm sure you'll learn a lot more for the $50,000.
What were your thoughts about even going to college? I mean, did you think, I don't want to go to college, I want to drive the truck?
Well, that was more in grammar school. After that, I don't know if I thought a lot about it, but I used to read a fair amount. And I thought, go to college, and maybe for 2 years, then I'd go to law school. I wanted to be a lawyer at 21 or 22. It didn't work out that way. I went in the military and so forth. I think it was 25 or 26.
So effectively, you dropped out of college.
I did after my freshman year. And I think that's the experience. A lot of freshman years are tough for a lot of kids because you're on your own. You got nobody to push you to do anything. And I was in another city, you know, in Boston. And it was good for me to get away in the military for a couple of years. And the military was good. You know, I think it did a good job for me.
What did you do in the military? You mentioned you were in Hawaii. That sounds like tough duty.
Mostly I did what I was told. That was a good start. But I was in the Signal Corps. I was supposed to be able to, on a line, supposed to be able to repair telephone exchanges. But I also trained as a soldier out in the field. When they got into gun issues in one of my recent campaigns, I said, I fired more guns than all these people put together that were running against me. But I'm not a fan of guns. Even when I was a prosecutor, I never felt comfortable, you know, using it as an exhibit, a handgun or a rifle. But in the military, it was a good experience for me. Met a lot of different people. There was a guy that slept above me at basic training. He had taught nothing less than a class of colonels at MIT. And his father, I think, ran for president on the Communist Party ticket, you know, back in the 30s. I think his name was Browder. But that's that kind of mix-up. And I dealt with more people of color, because you didn't have a lot in Portland. I dealt more with different ethnicities. It was good. I mean, I think I learned as much in the Army as any place I've ever been. And besides that, I got money to go to college and first year to a law school with the GI Bill.
You, what did you say? You were in the Signal Corps?
I guess that's what they call
it. You were supposed to learn how
it.
to fix telephones or something?
Well, I went to a school at Fort Monmouth where they
Where's that?
in New Jersey.
Okay.
And I went to basic training at Fort Dix. And I was there in December, January, February. My toes are still freezing from sleeping outside on a thing they call bivouac. But it was good for me. All in all, I have no fault with that. And on occasion, once I got elected governor, somebody I hadn't seen in 25 years called me up from Texas. He said, "Is that you, Brennan?" You know, and because they had seen my probably ineptness as a great soldier. It wasn't there. But it was, as I said, the military did more for me than I did for them.
So you left the military after a couple of years.
Yeah, I went back to be at Boston College.
Went back to Boston.
And graduated from Boston College.
Your major?
Everybody at the Jesuit schools at that time majored in philosophy. But I think outside of that, economics.
Okay. Now I understand this probably, we do a U-turn here and go back. Maybe you did this after college. I don't know. We ran a hot dog stand at Old Orchard.
I did that in 2 summers at Old Orchard. I had a hot dog stand with a guy named Dudley Coyne, who was a great athlete. You know, he was only 6 foot tall and used to score 35 points playing for the University of Maine. He and I ran a hot dog stand. We didn't make a lot of money. In fact, what reflected the attitude is that was the place where all the Canadian girls came and hung around. And I'd be out talking to him. He's cooking hot dogs. And he'd say, Joey, we're running out of pennies. I said, give him nickels, for change. But that actually happened. But yeah, so it was good, but very modest rewards. And if it rained, the place was on the beach. You didn't do any business.
Was it like a push cart?
Oh, no, there was a little stand. It had a roof and everything.
Not running water or anything.
There was a building behind that was sort of a bed and breakfast that we could hook up the hose.
Unbeknownst to them.
Yeah, no, it was a good experience, a lot of fun.
Were you dating anybody back then?
I don't think anybody would go out with me.
So I take that as a no?
No, not anybody. I wouldn't want to embarrass anybody.
Why not?
That's the way I am.
Okay. What'd you learn running a hot dog stand?
I know that you had to get things at a certain price and sell it for a greater price if you were going to make any money. I mean, I think then I could get a case of Coke for like $1.20, like 5 cents paying the wholesaler. And I felt a little guilty selling it for 12 cents. Right now, out these places, it'd be $1.50. But that's like a friend of mine was into banking, very successful here in Maine. Now, we became friendly after I was governor. And he described, the banker, what a banker does is they rent money wholesale and they parcel out at retail. And the difference is quite substantial. If you ever look at your bank account, find out you've got $1,000 in it, you've got 1 cent interest for the month. But your credit card, you're paying maybe as much as 19 to 20%.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about your experience as a lawyer, which sort of jumps ahead. So you graduated, you get your diploma. What's your first job out of college?
Well, I met a lawyer at the local AMVETS post where I used to play a little poker. And first I did well at law school. I was first in my class, very tiny class, very tiny. And I took the bar exam, and I was second in the bar exam. I always say that to give a little background. I was kind of a serious student at law school and preparing for the bar exam. But I went down to interview with a lawyer who was well known in York County, probably the most prestigious lawyer there. And he offered me a job. He said, we can't pay Wall Street prices. He offered me a job, $100 a week. And I said, I'm from Portland. I'm not going to Saco, to practice law. So I started and shared an office with a guy named Casper Tavanian, who had been practicing for about 15 years. He was very nice to me. We did a lot of work representing people charged with crimes. And that was an interesting experience. And I did that for a few years. Before you know it, I was at the legislature, and then I switched sides and ran for district attorney. Yeah, also one thing I was always willing, maybe it came out of playing pool with my mother's money for the bills, I was always ready to take risk. A lot of people are very able, they don't run for office. It's obvious if you look at the Congress, some of the people there. You've got to be willing to take risks. Don't be afraid to fail. In fact, I gave that speech at 50 high schools. Don't be afraid to fail. And I also used to lead in with a joke. And once the principal, 2 years down the road, called and say, Joe, don't tell that joke again, because it was embarrassing to the principal. That's what it was.
What was the joke? Do you remember it?
Yeah,
What,
vaguely.
are you willing to say it?
No, it's not even funny. It's something about a guy, living at home with his mother, who was associated with the school system, and she's having trouble getting him up to get to school, and he's kind of resisting. And she says, "You've got to go. You're the principal." None you can understand. The principal didn't like that one.
So the principal said, Joe,
Well,
could you
I actually
just skip that as part of your repertoire?
I actually heard that and stole it from Tim O'Neill. He used to tell it all the time. But this particular principal wasn't very happy with it. No, it's not that bad.
Okay, so you get out of college and you come back to Maine, and people are knocking on your door saying, "Hey, you want to join our law practice?" Or how did that come together? What was the guy's name? Casper Devanian?
Casper Tavanian.
Tavanian.
Oh yeah, so he was terrific. His widow is still living. She's probably 90-ish, and she did nothing but work in all my campaigns. A lot of people in campaigns sit around and kibitz about things. There are others that really work, and there's all sorts of work. So he was terrific to me. She was. His sister, the Armenian community, was very nice to me.
How did you meet him?
Well, I met him playing poker at the Loring Ambets. The Loring family I'm a big admirer of. That's the Loring Air Force Base is named for him. And his mother lived in the same house as my father down on 4th Street. His name was Cronin. But Loring got the Congressional Medal of Honor, for taking his plane to knock out a North Korean position after he ran out of ammo. Of course, he got it posthumously.
Right.
Great family.
So you're playing poker, and he says, "Hey, Joe."
Yeah, it didn't happen overnight. I went to law school, and he says, "Hey, come on, we got a spare office there." And I think he was busy, wanted me to get a continuance, and I think he gave me $5.
So
after talking about $1,200 billing hours.
Yeah.
But then I got a fairly substantial criminal practice. And I think I was fairly effective. Not that I was the most articulate, knew the most about the law, but I was passionate about making sure, to the best of my ability, the person I represented wasn't going to jail. And the words they used then, keep them on the street.
Were there any cases that you recall that were outstanding? Any big name cases?
Well, I don't know how I deal with this. There was a case where a couple of kids from Bowdoin were charged with selling 50,000 tabs of LSD to undercover agents. I represented two within one of them. That was the biggest case around here for a long time. And
what year would that have been, give or take?
That probably was 69 or something. But it got all sorts of attention. And it was in the federal court. And, those cases are easy for the government to prove. First, the sale is made to a government agent. Secondly, all they have to do is take that stuff that was sold to a chemist and prove continuity and so forth. Very difficult case. You can't win. Then you couldn't even consider winning on the jury. But the kid I represent, a smart kid, came from a well-to-do family in Manhattan. And I was very passionate about keeping him on the street. I don't think he could have survived in jail. He didn't come from that type of background. And Judge Janeau gave him probation, but I was emotional in the court. And Janeau was highly criticized, even by lawyers for doing that. It was an incredible case. I'm talking 50,000 tabs. I don't want to hurt Bowdoin, in any way, because I have an honorary doctorate from Bowdoin. But no, it was incredible. And I was so emotional, I might have moved the judge.
When you say you were emotional, what do you mean?
Well, they tell you don't get emotional, baloney. I wanted the judge to feel like he was sentencing me. I wanted to get the client off. That's the way I felt about it. No, that was two or three smart young kids.
So you, not to dwell on this, but you said it several times that you were emotional. You're trying to get the judge to understand this is a smart kid from a good family that made a mistake.
I'm trying to get him to understand, don't send my client to jail. I don't think he'll survive. And incidentally, back there, I think Dan Lilly had one of the cases. Dan ran against me for county attorney. Dan Lilly is probably the best trial lawyer in the history of this state. The guy's incredible. But when he ran against me, he's from Holton. I'm from Portland. I had a fair amount of exposure as a state legislator. I mean, if they were going to choose who was the better lawyer, Dan Lilly would have won by a big margin. He's that good. But he didn't, It just seems strange because I followed Lilly's career. And actually, he's contributed to my campaigns in the past. But he is incredible. I mean, the number of murder cases that he's got not guilty is just awesome.
When did you go to the legislature?
I got elected in the so-called Goldwater year. Goldwater versus Lyndon Johnson in '64. So I would have been sworn in January of '65. I'm 103 years old.
Hey.
Yeah, and John Martin came the same year, the well-known representative from Eagle Lake. And Jerry Conley and I got elected at the same time.
Why did you run? And who did you beat to win?
Well, at that time, everybody ran at large in Portland. There were 21 candidates, maybe 22 for 11 seats. And I didn't have anything specifically going for me. I wasn't active in high school in anything political. I thought those people, what the hell? Why do you get involved in government and school and so forth? But I ran. I had an Irish name, and I'm early in the alphabet. Outstanding qualifications. And I think I finished 5th. And I didn't spend any money. I didn't do anything. So it was more the accident where my name was in the list. The ethnicity probably helped me in the Democratic primary. And there were people like Charlie Sharp, who was a well-known sheriff here, didn't work out. The late Bill Trobe, a dear friend of mine, was on the same, and he was more serious about it, didn't work out. I mean, I'm just saying the more accidental type things.
I think I've heard Dana Childs and Billy Childs talk about the same thing.
Yeah.
Their names, the beginning of the alphabet.
Oh, yeah, and Dana was the Speaker of the House, and very nice to me.
Was he a Republican back then?
He just switched. Prior to that year, he was a Republican, and he was a floor leader in the Republican Party. And it's a good thing that he joined the Democratic Party because we ended up like 90 Democrats and 60 Republicans. And there was very little experience. We had a hard time adjourning the House, But Dana was just a godsend. And very nice. I mean, I've known him a long time. He just passed away about 5 years ago.
What were your accomplishments in the legislature, would you say? And what informed your decisions and the types of things that you got involved in?
I think one of the things that was important I mentioned earlier, dealing with kids, truants being sent to jail, kids running away from home they should have run away from. But overall, in my legislative career, I did have a lot of accomplishments. I had very smart people working with me. One was David Flanagan, who later went on to be chairman of the CEO of Senate Maine Power Company. He worked as my legislative assistant, believe it or not. But I got through bills like that created the district attorney system. I hit bills with bond issues that made it possible to acquire a lot of park property. One of the very special things, I don't even know if it still exists, and this grew out of my experience of doing a lot of criminal work, is getting legislation through that if a kid had a driver's license and he was under 18 and he was stopped, or she, and they had any measurable amount of alcohol, they lost their license. And maybe I did that while I was governor, but it was a powerful one. Didn't cost anything, Families loved it. They could tell their son or daughter, if you drive and you're stopped, you lose your license for a year or two. And that's the life of a young person. And when I traveled around the state, I talked to the troopers. They say, we find kids drinking, but they're in the back seat. That was very, very important. Another big one was, but again, I'm mixing up the governorship, with legislature, kind of all blends in. Mm-hmm. The Finance Authority of Maine, which has been involved in almost every economic proposal in Maine, my office created that. And there used to be 3 or 4 authorities, and it just wasn't working.
There was a Maine Guarantee
Yeah,
Authority?
that's the one that Valsing was involved in when they tried to develop a sugar beet industry. It just wasn't working. They got a lot of negative criticism, very negative. In fact, we had a list of the things that we've done. I was kind of awed. After I read it, I say, I think I'll support that guy. Not before.
We're in the 60s, 1968 convention. Your position on the Vietnam War.
I was a nutcase against it. I thought it was stupid. And
you were a nutcase?
Well, I was very strongly against it, very fired up against it. I'm very honest, I think the United States, I love the country. I'm a full-fledged citizen, even though my parents come from another country. But I think we're too quick to bomb other countries, as we've done recently in Iraq. And I think we've overdone it in Afghanistan. We could have sent special operations and wiped out the place that they prepared for the 9/11. Instead, we're there a dozen years and it gets worse every day. But on the Vietnam War, I just didn't think it made any sense. And I actually represented people that that wouldn't go in the military, sometimes by appointment to court. But the Second World War made sense. We had to do what we did. Korean War, not as much. But since then, a lot of them haven't made any sense to me. And, we've got the weaponry, we've got the skill, we've got a well-trained military, but we've been too quick to use it.
Did your position put you in conflict with Maine's prestigious Ed Muskie?
Well, yeah, I was at the Democratic Convention in 1968, I guess it was. I was supporting Gene McCarthy. I had supported Bobby Kennedy before that because he got killed. And I was gravitated toward McCarthy because of his position on the war. I just didn't think it made any sense. It really did. It still doesn't make any sense to me. And it nearly tore this country apart. And I'm sure, says Senator Muskie, so what's that guy? Because Muskie was working his way on the ticket with Humphrey. I don't think Muskie was particularly fond of me. And, he had good reason as he saw it. And Muskie had made speeches defending the war when called upon by Lyndon Johnson, the president. And don't misunderstand, Muskie was a smart, able guy, good public servant.
Did you have confidential or private, maybe if it's confidential you can't talk about it, but did you have one-on-ones with Ed Muskie on this subject? Where he said, hey, Joe, what are you doing?
No, not on that, but on the Indian land claims, so we talked privately, because they couldn't get me to support coming up with $20 million. I said, if anybody comes up with money, it'd be the federal government. And that's the way it worked out. And Muskie said, well, I'll debate you up and down the state.
Did you have throughout your career, was there always some conflict with you and Ed Muskie?
Well, I think early in my career, I don't think Muskie knew I existed. And when he didn't know that I existed, he probably wished they didn't. No, that's the truth. Yeah. I wasn't tied in with his, and he backed other people basically against me as a rule.
Like Phil Merrill?
And probably George Mitchell. It gets a little crazy, but that's what's true. I mean, he did. Muskie was never in my corner. And again, I respect him as an able guy. but he had a right. He had the right to be wrong too.
And of course, George Mitchell ends up becoming a senator thanks to Joe Brennan.
Yeah, and George worked for me when I was district attorney as an assistant for about 10 months. He did a good job.
Let's talk about when you were district attorney. Or first, you were county attorney because that's what
It's
it
the
was
same
called.
thing. I mean, in right now, county attorney and district attorney in Maine, in Cumberland County, are synonymous. So county attorney is at that time, it's the same job that Stephanie has now for the last 20 years.
Why did you decide to run for county attorney?
I don't know, but maybe in my back of my mind, I was thinking of some sort of career in politics. I don't know. I really don't know. I guess, what do they say, people climb a mountain because it's there. It was there. And yeah, I can't say any specific thing that motivated me.
Who'd you run against? Do you remember?
A county attorney?
Yeah.
I think it was Dan Lilly. Dan Lilly. The best trial lawyer in the history of the state. And as I said, if it was on the merits, who was the better trial lawyer, he wins big. He's got the record to prove it. And as I said, ultimately, he gave money to my campaigns later on. And he was good. 'Cause we also jointly defended a couple of cases. And he's just incredible.
Interesting. And talk about your staff. You mentioned Mitchell a moment ago. For 10 months, he worked with you. Who else was on your staff as district attorney?
Well, Don Lowry, fancy education, pedigree, Brown, Harvard Law School, submarine officer. And actually, he was a Republican, but more liberal than most Democrats. He was terrific. He's still practicing law, I guess. Very able. Jerry Petroselli, who's been a long-time professor, first full-time, part-time at the law school, probably one of the smartest lawyers in the state. There were several others. Arthur Stilfen worked as a staffer in that. Dave Flanagan worked as an intern in there. John O'Leary, who later became, very able, became ambassador to Chile. In fact, I spent 10 days with him down there. Also worked. I was fortunate to get people smarter than me, and it wasn't difficult. I could go out any door and find them. And people that I trusted and knew their business. And it's one of the mistakes some people make. They don't, you get a lot of pressure to take somebody politically that's been helpful, and your heart goes out to them, and you want to do it. But you're kidding yourself in the long run unless you try to get the ablest people you can get that you trust, respect their integrity, and it makes life easier for you. Like, when you're running any substantial operation, if you put in a weak person, they're not doing the job, you don't like to fire them, because when you fire people in the public sector, it's front page and they get hurt in their family. So you end up trying to do their job too, but you get your own job. No, so I have been fortunate in that sense to get very able people, whether it's county attorney, district attorney, attorney general, floor leader in the Maine Senate, governor, Congress. I've been lucky. But it's luck plus an interest in getting the smartest, ablest people I can get.
The segue right to that, what lessons do you think you learned from the people that you had, and how did that help you or prepare you to run for governor?
Well, the Attorney General's job is a good one. You're into every issue. And a lot of times in some administrations, the people that are in charge, they turn something into a legal issue. Then the lawyer actually makes the decision. We had a lot of stuff in state government. I mean, so we had experience in so many areas, whether it's the environment, the Indian land claims, criminal cases. I mean, it's just a good background, that's all. I mean, you're all across the board. And as I said, though, a lot of things, luck, like I happened to get the Indian land claims. And even though I was an active legislator and had a lot of bills get through. People generally don't know legislators. They think the legislators think they do. They know them in their hometown to a certain extent, but even in a place like Portland, they tend to know the city councilors better, because it's local. It's, your question was, how did this influence?
Well, yeah, and you had a team of people who sort of, in some ways, stayed with you, like
Absolutely, yeah. And they're all loyal. If they weren't, I'd tell Redmond. Just kidding.
Talk about Redmond. How did you meet Dave Redmond? You're talking about Dave Redmond.
Yeah, David, he played for St. Dominic's. I played for Cathedral. He was a star pitcher who threw at the players. I think he did. And we got to know each other at the AMVETS. He had been in the Army about the same time as I. But his brother was in my class at Cheverus, younger brother, and his older brother was in my older brother's class at Cheverus. So we knew the families and so forth.
Okay. I have in the notes here that you should tell the story of the bullet hole through the house window. Does this ring any bells with you?
Oh, yeah.
Whose house are we talking about?
Well, I was living...
Who shot it? And what were you doing at the time?
Who shot it? It's interesting. I don't know. But I was living on Craigie Street, and we were fairly aggressive as prosecutors. And sometimes the people who are prosecuted don't like that. And so one day on a Sunday afternoon, someone drove down Craigie Street and fired bullets into my home. And my daughter then was about 2 months old. And the bullet went on the bed. And we notified the police and also the state police and a guy named Marty Greeley, who I grew up with. He was a top state police detective. He come over and he wanted to give me a gun so I would have my own firearm. I'm not comfortable with guns, even though I fired them in the Army. And later at the Portland Police Station, the police officer out in my yard, with a fancy gun and so forth for a couple of weeks. As to who did it, I don't know. There was a guy that was convicted that really was quite angry when he left the court because he was going to jail. There was another guy, I was out campaigning in a restaurant for governor, I guess, a couple of years later, who said to me, I didn't fire that gun. He came out of nowhere. I mean, they all knew about it. But it was very weird in that house. When you walked by the picture window, you're ducking down. And so, but nobody was ever charged. But it was not a good thing. Well, my son is a Secret Service agent, has been for 22 years. He's in Washington. Now, he had been with Obama, and he was with Obama when Obama was campaigning to get the nomination for a year, had a good relationship with him. And my daughter's, has 2 kids, lives in Brooklyn. She's getting her PhD. It goes on forever. She got her master's about 10 years ago, but because she had a couple of kids, and meanwhile, that's her excuse. People, they always got their dissertation and all the rest, but I hope she gets it.
What did the shooting, how did that impact you? I can remember as a reporter coming into getting involved in stories where I felt like I might be in some danger here, and is it really worth it?
I don't. It didn't get much attention in the press, very little. Now it would get all sorts of attention. I don't know if there's ever been a county attorney in the history of the state that bullets were fired at. I really don't. But it probably affected me for a few weeks, and a couple of weeks, I just went on with my life.
Were you home at the time?
Yes.
You heard it?
Somebody else may have heard it in the house and told me, but I did see the bullet. Sure. It was on the bed, that came through the window.
Wow. Let's talk about some of the causes that you have championed. Public power?
Yeah, I was, The big supporter of public power in the Senate was a guy named Peter Kelly, a senator from Aroostook County. In fact, Mel Leary was his press secretary. He ran for governor against me. Good guy, smart, great basketball player, got a scholarship to Harvard for it. And when he was in the Senate, he didn't do too much. He just voted whichever way I voted because he knew he wouldn't have to argue things. And he was ahead in the polls for a while. Mitchell ran that race. Mitchell won the primary. But so he was the big public power advocate, not me. I was involved in issues dealing with nuclear power. I was kind of leading the fight to close the nuclear power plant. I was quite moved at a public meeting I went to when some citizen got up and said, if we don't know what we're doing with nuclear waste, shouldn't we stop producing it? And somewhere or other that kind of registered with me, and it kind of made me for closing it. And I advocated it, basically its closing, and I lost in a public referendum.
That was a controversial position.
Oh, well, it was, but I tell you how, you asked me how I came about. I mean, it does make some sense if we don't know what we're doing with nuclear waste and it lasts, it seems like half-life is forever or something. Why do we keep producing it? And then they got into the issue. They thought for a while about putting a nuclear dump up around Sebago Lake. One of the dumbest things the federal government even considered. And I was very much involved in stopping that. With a lot of other people, don't misunderstand, Manager.
And the waste is still up in Wisconsin, right? I mean, it is.
The waste?
Yeah.
I think every nuclear power plant in the nation is a nuclear waste plant too, because that's what they do. No, and we just have been unable to address it. With the progress that had been made nationally, someplace in flyover country in Nevada where it seemed to make sense, but the will isn't there. And probably to the great credit of the senators and congressmen from Nevada that they could block it, how one little state could block it. But so I was involved in those issues, not always successfully.
So we're up into the 70s, and you decide you're going to run for governor.
That's right.
Who was your counsel at that time, and who did you sit down and say, you know what?
How
did people come to you and say, Joe, you're well positioned. Look at your background. You should run for governor.
I think one of the first people to urge me to run for governor was Jerry Talbot, the only African-American member of the legislature. I think Jerry was and I had seen some governors dealing with him in other capacities as a floor leader in the House and Senate. And I said, I think I know as much as that guy, maybe, and on a good day when I'm thinking clearly. And, I never thought about it way back. I thought it was beyond, my aspirations. And so I didn't think too much about it. But once I started dealing with governors, I think I can make as much sense maybe as that guy. And that's how I get into it.
Okay. And how did you organize and move in that direction?
Organize or disorganize?
Well, how did you disorganize?
Yeah. I had no dough. When I first ran, I won 4 counties, but I think I took in $16,000. Now they spend millions and millions, but I campaigned like hell. It was so delightful to come midnight and there was no bowling alley or something I would be going into, and no one was going to bother me for 5 or 6 hours. But just campaigned, got around, and stayed at it. And I was lucky. I got a lot of smart people around me that could write too. And then when I became governor, this guy here, Frank O'Hara, is a writing genius. He just wrote so many thoughtful things. In fact, members of the delegation would always be odd when I was giving some ceremonial speech. He was the brains.
There's a question here about how did your service in the Maine Senate affect your understanding of the role of the legislature as well as the role of state government?
Well,
That sounds like an essay question.
yeah, I prefer multiple choice. I don't know, the Senate, I was the floor leader. You know, and the reason I was the floor leader is Jerry Conley, who had been the minority, assistant minority leader, he was the logical one to get that position, you know, when I got elected to the Senate. I only served one term in the Senate. But on election night, it was clear I had won at 9 o'clock. And Conley called me and said, Joe, I'm supporting you for floor leader, even though he could have had it. And I made 3 or 4 calls. We only had about 12 or 13 senators, and I had it all wrapped up before 9:30. And it's, well, the legislature, you learn a lot about government, but it's much different than being governor. I mean, you can advocate anything under the sun in the House and the Senate, but when you're governor, you gotta deal with the finances. You know, the gazunters have to equal or be in excess of the gazouters. As a legislator, you don't think of that. And I always had programs I was for. In fact, the Portland Press Herald once wrote a little editorial and said, Brennan thinks all he needs is another bill to cure the common cold. You know, and I had people like Flanagan and others at that time that had ideas. And I honestly think, and this probably is not fair, I read the New York Times faithfully, and I got a lot of ideas of that paper every Sunday to put into some legislative form. That's the truth.
Yeah. The liberal left-wing media influences Brennan's decisions.
Liberal left-wing, I think, really fighting for social justice, economic justice. Right now in the country, we talk a lot about inequality. And, you know, when you have people that run a company and they're making 500, 600 times what the worker's making, it doesn't sound right to me. And actually, from my own experience dealing with people at high levels, the worker in the factory is working harder. They're working harder. You know, I had somebody just the other day say to me, well, the people that are working for the power company, they're making more than me, and I'm senior management. I said, well, why don't you go out and climb those poles, you know, when it's 10 below zero to get those wires working? Hey, let me tell you, they're working harder than you. I mean, the people that work the hardest get the least. That doesn't square with social justice or economic justice to me.
Let's go back a little bit and talk about the people that you had as the district/county attorney, the guys that were working for you, the Stilfen and Mitchell and those guys. What came of them? Did they stay with you during much of your political career?
Actually,
And who stayed with you?
I take a lot of pride in the fact that I don't think anybody ever left me. Once there was a guy that had a pretty big job in the State Department and in state government. I think he was interested in possibly going with Charlie Cragen against me, because that spread around the office. And what this? Not that Cragen's not a very smart, able guy, and we get along very, very well. But generally, everybody that's worked with me generally stayed with the program. Or I'd tell Redmond. Not really.
And what would Redmond
I shouldn't
do?
do it. No.
Oh, we can't say that?
No, he'd bitch about it. But I got to be careful with that. No, they did. No, I don't know. I hope we treated people with a certain respect and that we supported them when they were under pressure, you know, from some criticism. And that happened on occasion. I don't know. I mean, they could say, talk about it better than I could, because, as I said, you know, there's a tendency of these things to try to make yourself look good.
And again, you're talking about people like Flanagan and Mitchell and Stilfen and Want to talk about Stilfen a little bit? I don't think we've talked about him. Tell us, people might not know him real well. He was sort of a quiet guy.
Yeah, Arthur Stilfen, he came from Rockland. His father was a Republican state senator. His grandfather was a Republican state senator. And for those who go back a little way, he managed his father's campaign for the House, the last one. And his father was defeated by none other than David Emory, who was just a young kid who went on to be a congressman for a number of years. But Arthur went to the University of Maine, and he started at the law school. After a year, he didn't like it, so he left. And I then got elected county attorney. I did not know him. Somebody talked about him as being a nice guy, so I hired him as an administrative assistant. And pretty soon, he was organizing the office, making all the decisions, and we became very friendly. And he went back to law school, got his law degree. And at one point, as Attorney General, I was having some problem with a district attorney that was a little too easy on people who were charged with crimes, and we tried to remove them. We did temporarily, and Arthur took over that position as the district attorney down in York County. Later, when I got elected governor, I appointed him to be public safety commissioner, which is in charge of the state police and several law enforcement organizations. He did a super job, very honest, very smart, very diligent, and one of the few people that didn't want to raise, even though he would have deserved it. He was so good at it. And unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago. Tough, good guy, the best.
Pool player?
Not with any eptness, if that's the opposite of inept. He was very interested in sports and other things, but just so good to me and so good to anything we tried to do, and so honest and competent and diligent. You not only got him, you got his wife and his daughter and his grandchildren.
And how about George Mitchell? He worked in your office, and everybody knows the rest of the story, I guess, on George Mitchell, but many people maybe don't know how it was that you appointed him to be a U.S. Senator.
Well, he
the
worked.
Backstory, I should
Yeah, he worked with me for about a year in the district attorney. People were stunned that he would be in that humbling position. In fact, I think just after I named him, I was walking uptown with George, and we ran into Jim Brunel and Don Hanson, two political reporters, for the Portland paper. And I think they congratulated him on his promotion to obscurity. Little did they know the relationship that developed then. He tried a couple of cases with me, and he did terrific work in the office, even though he was practicing law with a private firm at the time. No case was too complicated. No work was too much. And he was impressive in how hard he worked and how effectively he worked. And his relationship with anybody he dealt with, whether it was the police or other lawyers, was just like flawless. So I got to know him quite well. In fact, I first really dealt with him when I was, early in my career as county attorney. I think, I'm trying to think the exact time, but I was getting ready to run for another office, and I had prepared my own little card, and he looked at it and changed it and made it seem also so much saleable. No, but obviously he's gone on to, his talent was recognized by the U.S. senators. He was elected majority leader after 8 years. I think George could have been a serious candidate for president. He would have been smarter than all the presidents I've known.
Which would have disqualified him.
Well, yeah, a lot of people don't want to take, and you don't know what their lives are like. They have other lives that you have, your home life and the rest of it. But I think he was probably encouraged to run from time to time. And he was interested, I think, at one time in being Secretary of State. And he's been kind of a de facto Secretary of State under Clinton, dealing with the issues over in Northern Ireland, and under Obama, where he was involved in the Palestinian-Israeli issues. And of course, after 9/11, he was the first choice, along with Henry Kissinger, to look into how it all happened, what we could do about it. And obviously, he's a big expert in baseball. He ran that thing too. No, he's been a main treasure.
Can you talk about the Northern Ireland situation and how Mitchell, how he used his talents, and did you have any contact with him during any of that?
Not much really. Once I was in Ireland, and the equivalent of the Kentucky Derby was being run, the Derby they call it, and George was there, and we met, and walking through the crowd to a special place they had for him, everybody was kind of raving about him. It was kind of humbling for me. Even though my parents were from Ireland, this guy here with as much of a Lebanese background as any was the star of the show.
Well, he has some Irish background.
Yeah, that's true. In fact, the first time I read, Kelly had an Irish name. Lloyd LaFountain's mother was Irish. He was in the governor's race. And Mitchell, I think his father, I don't know if it was Callan or Kilroy, the name was Irish. That's true. But everybody was Irish. I don't know what it all meant. George won the primary because he had resources through the Muskie campaigns.
And I mean, it's fairly apparent, I guess, but let's talk a little bit about your appointing him to the U.S. Senate.
Well, an interesting story there is when I was governor, I got a call from Ed Muskie, and Muskie asked me if I would meet him at the Brunswick Naval Air Station tomorrow morning. Something important has happened. So I met him in the Admiral's office down there, and Muskie told me that Jimmy Carter had asked him to serve as Secretary of State. And we had a little talk. Muskie was actually very good at this time, very human. He said, whoever you appoint, will you ask them to keep my staff? Because their lives are here at this time, at least for a while. They've got commitments, mortgages, and things of that sort. And I said, absolutely. And at that time, I think he thought Governor Curtis would be appointed. And but anyway, the interesting thing is Muskie called the White House, and I'm sitting there, and he wanted to get these assurances about his staff, which is, again, very, very good of Muskie. He said, the green light is flashing. Those are his words, that things are okay. He got on his plane that afternoon. Carter, announced that he'd be Secretary of State. And then I had the chance to appoint someone to the U.S. Senate. People first, well, maybe Brennan will appoint himself. And actually, I'd rather be governor than the U.S. Senate or congressman any day. You actually have serious power. And you can make any issue the biggest issue in the state. And at any rate, a lot of people were interested in that position, a lot of great people. And the top part is a lot of people that were good to me when I was up and when I was down. They didn't leave the program. They didn't stop supporting me, but you can only appoint one. And I thought George, from trying cases with him, from working with him, from the reputation he developed as a federal judge and a federal prosecutor, even those were short periods of time, was the appropriate choice. And obviously, the Senate Democrats felt the same way. 6 or 7 years later, he's majority leader, which is a top position.
It should be obvious, but I'll ask it anyway. The green light is flashing meant what?
It meant that Ed Muskie was satisfied that the governor who would appoint his successor would address the concerns of his staff at least for 6 months or a year, so they wouldn't be left without a job, because all the people on the staffs serve at the pleasure of senators and congressmen. No, Muskie was looking out for his people, which I found highly commendable.
Did Muskie make any suggestions to you about who you might appoint?
I don't think he made any direct suggestion, but...
Did he make any indirect suggestions?
Well, I think he thought Governor Curtis, who was an excellent governor, maybe did as well as any governor I've known, did some big things. For example, Curtis promoted an income tax and fought for it before he was running for re-election. I can't imagine any politician in America doing that today. Jack Kennedy wrote a book, Profiles in Courage. Curtis, if there were Profiles in Courage in Maine, he would get a big chapter. He's not so liberal a Democrat now, but he was absolutely excellent as a young governor and supported good causes. Now, he became a little more conservative in his, as he got a little older.
So it came down to Mitchell and Curtis?
Yeah, they were two of the most logical ones, yes. And as I said, Ken was, he had a great record as a governor, excellent.
I wanted to ask you a question about the Irish Heritage Center. And this is sort of, we hadn't talked about, I was going to ask you this, but I figured it's probably not inappropriate since we're doing the video for them. Can you talk about your own feelings about being asked to sit with us and talk about your career?
Well, I'm delighted that anybody asks me anything anymore, and that I even have a camera pointed at me anymore. But I think it's important, to people that might look at this, whatever they may glean from it, that it also is a life, and I believe reflective of opportunity in America, where Joe Schmo can go on to where I had a chance to go to, coming from a very humble background. All sorts of other people can do it. And actually, I'm worried about our politics today. Some people may be discouraged from that it could make a real contribution because it's so negative. I like to say the most recent poll showed 7% approve of the Congress of the United States. That's pretty sad. Those 7%, probably a good percentage of those people, when they're asked a question, they say, oh yeah, they're fine. They haven't even thought about the Congress. They're thinking about their job, their family, and their life. It's difficult.
What are your thoughts about the Irish Heritage Group even existing, and what they're doing for the people, the Irish who came to Portland and to Maine?
I always get a kick out of the line, the Irish are a fair people. They never speak well of one another or anybody else. Somebody would say, I wouldn't say it. No, the Irish have been good to me. And they've had a lot of opportunity here. I don't think there have been a lot of Irish governors, for example. I can think of one, that's about it. I think, though, my life shows the opportunity that exists if you're willing to take risk. And, if you look for a job and you get fired, nobody even knows it. But if you get fired or don't get elected when you're running for public office, it's Brennan trounced or something like that in the headline, even though that never happened. All of them were close. That didn't go my way. But I kept giving them more and more opportunities to vote for me or against me, and they bastards voted against me. But that's okay, it's part of life.
Yeah. Were those losses hard for you? I mean, obviously they were hard for you, I would guess.
Everybody, as I said, in the private sector, you lose your job, your family knows. And in the public sector, you get a lot of people involved that their hopes and desires are with you, and it doesn't happen. But that's life. It's the way it is. But you can come back. Take Mitchell. He lost, came back big. We helped him, of course. Ed Muskie lost a mayor's race, came back and became big. Even Dick Nixon, who practically speaking, may have been one of the smartest people to be president, notwithstanding his problems, lost to Kennedy, then lost the governorship and came back to be elected not once but twice to the presidency. And I know the other problems and so forth. Bill Clinton ran for Congress and lost. Bill Clinton sat next to me at the governor's conference. We got elected at the same time. He didn't return the next time. They had 2-year terms. He lost. And he came back, and now there's, I guess, a Clinton dynasty. It's going to happen. And if you take positions like in my case, I'm for gun control. Every time I see a situation like in Connecticut or out in Colorado and these places, I'm not against people having guns, but every nutcase ought not to be able to go and buy a gun. And but in some states, it's literally a killer issue for the candidate that supports gun control, reasonable gun control. But that's the way life is. For every winner, there's got to be a loser.
Back to the Indian land claims. Let's start with your decision to run for Attorney General or among your party.
Well, you know, when I was in law school, I think an Attorney General came to the law school to talk about his job, and I heard it, you know, so many of them came out of the legislature, and that kind of gave me the idea, if you're in the legislature and you built up a following and your party has the majority, you got a good chance to be Attorney General. You had to be a lawyer, of course, but not everybody was going to, you know, do that or go that route. And so I ran. In fact, I ran against a guy that was very able, John Lund. He had been in the legislature with me. He was a very good Attorney General. He organized that office probably better than it ever had been organized. And even though his party wasn't in the majority, mine was, he ran and he tried hard to get it, and he was a very credible one. In fact, he got somebody who was in business with him, Roger Snow, I think, a Democrat, to support him, won. But I got about a half a dozen Republicans. He probably lost some Republicans because he was too good Attorney General, you know, that he supported consumer efforts and so forth. But that was a great job in preparation for the governorship. And also another place where there's a lot of talent. A lot of people in Maine, you know, wanted to serve in the office, but a lot of people, even from fancy law firms outside the state, wanted to come to Maine to make their life. And the state has benefited from a lot of these very able people that served for periods of time in the Attorney General's office. And it was a terrific position for me. I think I learned a lot more about state government, a lot more about what the governorship is about, what the governor can do and can't do.
At what point, is there a point that you can look back in your career and say that it was at that point that you decided to really have some true ambition to become a politician, a guy that could make it to be governor? I mean, I think back to your sister filling out your application to go to BC and you thinking, you know, I'd rather be playing pool and shooting some dice maybe. Okay, I'll try BC. And, you know, all of a sudden, someplace along the line, there's a guy who's in the legislature who's saying, or, you know, maybe I could be Attorney General. Maybe I could be governor. You know, what happened?
I think actually meeting other attorney generals and meeting other governors and meeting legislative leaders and coming to the conclusion I like them, they're smart, but I think I can do as good a job. Maybe I have maybe I understand some of the issues in Maine, maybe as well, if not better. And actually, like the Attorney General thing, if you're in the majority party that's going to elect the Attorney General, And say there are a dozen, 15 lawyers in the legislature, only a couple might be interested, or a few. Not that others aren't interested, but they don't want to risk failure. You just run and do the best you can. And as far as the governorship, again, meeting with a few governors, John Reed, Ken Curtis, Jim Longley, and some other governors. Someone has to have the job, you know. I know that's not a good rationale, but I had actually had a leadership position in the Maine House, leadership position in the Maine Senate, a county attorney in the largest county of the state, chief prosecutor for 250,000 people, 4 years as the top lawyer in the state for the government. I'd even argued a case in the United States Supreme Court. All of this gives you a little confidence that maybe you could handle the job. And I've been really lucky in getting able people with me. It's a little like the football great running back. He's kind of useless without a good line. I know they had a good line. The line was superior to the running back, and it works out well.
So you're the Attorney General, and the Indian land claims case percolates to the top. And talk about that. What was that all about, and what was that about for you?
Well, first, the case was based on some law passed in 1795, the Non-Intercourse Act, whereby anything that dealt with Indian tribes, you had to be very careful about approving any transfers of land or money. But I had a hard time getting over the hurdle that we have to pay money for something that happened 200 years ago. I was into the idea, my brother worked in the factory, we ought to spend money to help people now. And if we start correcting all of these historical wrongs, how much more wrong could we be than the way we treated black people, African Americans, even the great founders of this country? They say all people are created equal, but basically under their breath, but blacks. I mean, Jefferson had 150, 200 slaves. Washington, rather generous of him, freed his slaves upon his death. Don't misunderstand me, they were great heroes of the country, and they deserve a lot of attention. But how do we correct all these? And somebody is always taken over from somebody else in countries, probably not as much as in Africa or in the Mideast. So it's, I had a problem with saying, there were no statute of limitations, latches, which is another term for the statute of limitations. I just had a hard time trying to address it, so I took a strong position. I said the case is without merit. And if some court finds it has merit, then if anybody's going to pay, it should not be the people of the state of Maine, but the federal government. Sure, they'd contribute, their 0.5%, whatever they were of the population. I mean, that's what I felt about it. Governor Longley was into the fact that we shouldn't have a nation within a nation, and I understood that. And incidentally, I'm not sure if I mentioned that. Can I stop it? Did I mention it? I think I did. Down in the fancy Metropolitan Club in Washington.
No, I haven't.
Not on tape.
Oh, not on tape. But, okay, and Governor Longley and I shared the same view. In fact, a very poignant moment was we're at the Metropolitan Club, one of the fancy clubs in Washington. Edward Bennett Williams was there, and he was kind of sort of supporting the state because Governor Longley got him involved. And Governor Longley and Ed Muskie, who was a leading senator at that time, and both Williams and Muskie were trying to persuade me to have the state kick in $20 or $30 million. And I said, I think the case is without merit. And no, I'm not doing it. And Longley slipped me a note, said, I'll back you all the way, Joe. And that was important because Longley was quite popular at that time. And we shared the same view. You know, ultimately, and I wasn't against the Indians. They weren't terribly happy with me, I think, when I ran for governor the next time. I think I was beaten 70-2 or something in one of the reservations. The awkward thing is I was probably as liberal, you know, governor as we've seen, and I was very sensitive to their concerns. Just like with the Japanese that were put in camps as a governor, at the governor's conference, I supported, you know, giving them money for what they lost. But they were still living. It wasn't 200 years ago, it was 1942 or 3 or 4. So it actually worked out for the state. The case got settled. Whatever money, 70 or 80 million, was paid by the federal government. But there was a little tension between me and Senator Hathaway and Senator Muskie, and it was them versus Longley and Brennan.
Was there pressure from the president of the United States at that time? Do you remember any of that?
I don't remember. We met with the President's Council 7 or 8 times down at the White House, but I don't recall any direct pressure from President Carter.
Okay. How did this case help you?
How did what?
How did this case and its resolution help you in your run for governor?
Oh, I think it helped me a lot, but it wasn't planned that way. Whatever image I had, and I'm not sure how big an image that was, it was probably as very liberal. I think this made me seem like I was sensible. I could go to Rotary clubs. I had a great little speech, and I'd get a terrific response. And the Rotaries generally wouldn't be supportive of my politics, was pro-minimum wage, stronger unions and things like that. So I think it helped me a lot. In fact, I used to wrap up my speeches at the Rotary Club talking about President Carter. I said Carter in his campaign said he wanted to give us a government as good, as honest, and as decent as the American people. I said, I know a good place you could start by telling his Attorney General not to threaten the people of the state of Maine in regard to their title to their property in half the state. I hope he'd do that consistent with his commitment.
Who did you have for advisors back then in this case?
Well, the lawyer that did much of the work was a fellow named John Patterson, and he did a good job. He worked very hard. Sometimes the lawyers that do the work don't get the credit, but that's the nature of politics. A lot of the work is done by other people. You know, for the president gets the credit or the criticism. Attorney General likewise. But he did a lot of work and was very effective. And it was a very spirited relationship between Tom Terrain and my office. And I always say Terrain did an excellent job for the tribes. How would you like to, just out of law school, take on a case, you know, based on a law 200 years old? And furthermore, that jeopardized the title of real estate in a good part of the state, you know, because if they won the whole shebang, you know, I suppose it would jeopardize half the real estate titles.
That's what the people were Ropes and Gray were saying, right?
Oh yeah, there were a lot of fancy law firms involved in this. I don't know if it was Ropes and Gray, but there was a New York law office.
Well, they were the bond counsel, I guess.
Yeah, well, that at the bond council, yeah, I think they may have said that there's a cloud on the title, you know, of too much of the land. And then individuals, like if you owned a home, I knew some liberals, I won't name them, that they weren't quite so excited about the Indian land claims if they owned property in the claimed area.
It changed the complexion of the race, I guess, for 1978. You, a raging liberal from the biggest city in the state, suddenly you had some support statewide.
I think that, I don't know if I'm going to use the word raging.
I
You might
bet.
delete that. But
Strike that from the record.
yeah, I think that it gave me credibility in different parts of the state. It really did. And it probably made me more electable and probably got me elected, but it wasn't planned that way. You know, politics, a lot of things to luck. I didn't know a thing about this case when I went into the Attorney General's office. And then I started to live with it every day. I think I was interviewed by Mel Leary about every day on the case. And we were basically singing the same song, It Has No Merit. And there were a lot of court proceedings, not trials, but proceedings, and many things in Washington dealing with it. But bottom line, did it help me in regard to whatever image I had that was left, that maybe I was sane?
How were the tribes treated in the resolution of this case?
I think they were treated reasonably well. I think they got $70 or $80 million. It's a hard thing. So many of them struggled. They are the Native Americans. I never was against them. In fact, I had several of the leaders of the tribes at the Blaine House. We played pool. I think I made a couple dollars. But we had some similar backgrounds. They had nuns, some of them, teaching on the reservations. You know, the same type of teachers I had. And they were nice to me afterward, you know, personally. But I did not do well in the primary.
70 to 2?
That's not the, but it was about, the ratio was terrible. It was humbling. And if I were a member of the tribes, I probably would have voted against me too.
Did the pool games happen after the settlement?
I think that was after the settlement.
So there's a little more money on the table?
Yeah, no, they invited me to come up with very modest, because I couldn't afford it. They had just gotten 70 million. I only had a couple of bucks. But they invited me to come up with my son and fish and so forth.
Let's talk about the 78 run and set the mood, the tone of the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times. What was going on?
Well, in 78, you know, that issue of Indian land claims was still alive. It wasn't finally settled until after I was in the governor's office. But that was one of the issues. I'm trying to think of something else in 78. You know, we always talk about the same things, economic development. And
but in the Carter years, we had lots of inflation and gas prices had gone up. And
absolutely. In fact, I don't think anybody could figure out what inflation would be ever less than 7 or 8%. And that created a problem with pensions and so forth. Some of them that were indexed, it was very, very difficult. It was, but the issues are always the same. When I gave my first inaugural address, I looked up Governor Chamberlain, you know, the famous general in the Civil War, and he was talking about the same thing 100 years before, in effect, that Maine was kind of a nursery. Kids were born here, then they had to leave here to make a living. A lot of those, he had a problem with the state prison. We had a problem. A lot of the issues hadn't changed much in 100 years.
so talk about the campaign.
The campaign, I'm trying to think.
Anything remarkable about the campaign?
I don't think so. In the primary, the leading opponent was Phil Merrill, who was probably one of the best debaters in the state Senate, a very good speaker and so forth. And he had backing from the Muskie type people. You know, again, they always came around, not on my side. But I had built a pretty good organization, you know, and I had a lot of people that dealt with me in state government that were strongly supportive. But it was a hard fight. I had no dough again, no real money. I raised a little money in the general election, but I think both the primary contest and general election probably didn't spend much more than $500,000, which is peanuts now. you take Bloomberg, the mayor of New York City, he and two of his buddies gave Angus King, as I understand and reading the paper, $1.5 million. You know, it's just crazy.
So, general election, who's in the race?
Linwood Palmer, and I think Buddy Franklin was in that race. And Linwood Palmer, again, a very likable people. He was a legislator, and nice guy. He really was. I'm not just trying to be overly generous. But once in one of the debates, he was kind of trying to chide me all the things I had done, going from my paper route to being a teacher, you know, at Oxford High School, being in the military, being a prosecutor. He was wondering how I could do all those things. And I said to Linwood, you know, on the debate, I said, if you hadn't left the state for 20 years, you could have been up here watching me. No, yeah, he was a real gentleman, so forth. But he was a serious candidate. They were out there fighting, I can assure you. But I always liked that. You know, I don't want to be negative, but it wasn't, he opened the door, as they say in law.
And so, but having Buddy Franklin in the race, what impact did that have on the whole race, and what was the outcome?
Buddy Franklin actually was a good speaker. He had a following. And on election day, I was down at Bath Iron Works, and I could sense he had support. You know, he was kind of right-wing and so forth, always lecturing. And the ultimate, a few years later, he got involved with the chorus. I mean, one of the choir girls. It was, but sometimes independents from the right were not so much of a problem for me. Independents from the left, big problem. So Buddy Franklin, he didn't hurt me, probably helped me, but I don't think it would have changed the result whether he was in or not. I don't know.
Do you remember
But
what were the numbers?
I kind of think I probably won by 6 or 7 points, but I'm not sure offhand.
Okay.
I haven't.
Okay.
I know the next time when I ran for election, I think I got 62%. I don't think anyone's gotten a higher one in Maine history. King was slightly at 61.1 with no serious opponent. Connolly was a good guy, but not Jerry. That's the fisherman's cap.
Tom Connolly.
Yeah.
Was your thinking about any particular issue changed during this campaign? Are we talking nuclear here?
I think that was while I was governor, when I said I opposed, I support, I guess, closing the Maine Yankee. And the issue was simple. Yeah, that was after, yeah.
So during the campaign, were there issues that you changed your position on? Taxes, no new taxes,
I got into a primary, and I was in a debate, and I didn't think it was going well. So I made a call at the line of scrimmage to wit in the middle of the debate. I just blurted out a no tax increase pledge. I did, and that's, even though I thought I was lousy in that debate, that's what got all the coverage in the paper the next day. So a bad day actually turned into a good day in the press. But then later on, when I was governor, I had to deal with that. I think I kind of said something, there would be no tax increase unless we're in dire straits. Then the issue became, what are dire straits? And I got around it. I increased and advocated strongly, adding about 50 cents to a six-pack of beer. But we called it a premium. I mean, it was a tax, clearly, but we had to deal with our commitment in that debate. It was a premium, and you can imagine people play with that. But if you weren't a drinker, it didn't bother you a bit. They probably said, serves them right, they ought to pay more.
What was the reaction from your team of advisors and you came off after
I-
that,
I-
after
I-
that debate? Did they say, Joe? Hello?
Well, there was one debate that Larry Spiegel, another great guy, he died very young. He was my press secretary, a terrific person. He had been with the Associated Press, and sometimes I say, don't get somebody from the press as your press secretary. They still think they're working for the Associated Press. You know what I mean? Which is to their credit. But you want someone to market you. You're not looking for somebody to report things as they are. No, it's true. And I know it. I think that was the one that Larry was very uncomfortable after the debate. I said, Larry, you got to put a positive face on. You got to. It went fine. That's it. No, a very great guy. You knew Larry, yeah.
Was it in fact a spontaneous, calculated invention, or had you talked to Jerry Connolly and Dave Redmond and anybody else about this, or you just said,
It was
you know what?
spontaneous but not calculated. It was a call at the line of scrimmage. Instead of running through the line, we were going to throw a Hail Mary. And it didn't hurt me in the long run because it made me be more careful about government spending. But it did serve a purpose. And as I said, the next day, to the extent that the press covered it, that's what they talked about.
And when you say not calculated, you mean it wasn't planned.
Oh,
It was,
absolutely
here
not.
you are, you're on the...
I said, this isn't going that well to myself. I thought that might be a good time to do something. No, I'm serious. That's truth. And I don't know how I fitted it in. Maybe they opened the door or something,
Yeah,
as the lawyers say,
right.
on taxes.